Last year's school syllabus was not completed and learning outcomes were stifled due to the COVID-19 pandemic. That's according to research conducted by the Helen Suzman Foundation. The foundation's researcher, Mihloti Sherinda, joins us now to talk more on this. A very good afternoon to you, Mihloti, and thank you so much for joining us. So, the school...
Good afternoon, Moreno.
The academic year, Mihloti, was extended deep into December with the whole point of it being completed. So now if you guys are saying, as the Helen Suzman Foundation, that it wasn't completed, what do you mean by that?
Moreno, on the 1st of June 2021, the Minister of Education herself made submissions to the Parliament to make it clear that we have had 54% of lost in contact time in schools. That's number one. Number two, to make it clear that we have 75% of learning loss, which means that we have not done 75% of the learning that was supposed to be done in schools. And the impact of that has been that we have had loss of contact time because of total closures, and some grades were definitely closed. So schools were not continuing. And we have lower grades of students who are of learners who are not getting time to learn because they're not in class, and you understand. And so because of that loss of contact time, that has led to now loss of our impact. Now, that means, yeah.
Sorry, Mihloti, I was just going to ask, what then does that mean for the academic structure of the country, for learners, for scholars, in terms of, because it says, of course, COVID-19 has stifled schooling. So what exactly does that mean for the average learner?
It means they don't know as much as they should, and it means that we are not developing them as we are supposed to in terms of the curriculum. And that is the main issue. And I think that's why in our research, we made recommendations to say that we need to think about the unpredictability of the virus, and we need to think about how we are going to create structures that are going to make it easier for students to learn remotely without forcing them to get into class. You would also know that about 2 weeks ago, the minister has also made submissions to Parliament to try and make sure that we don't have the spring break. But that also obviously has been denied, because that is not possible. Students need to rest. And that is the challenge that we are experiencing, because we have so much loss of contact time. We are now forcing students to be in class and to learn. We also want them to have a shorter social distancing. There are just so many problems with forcing students to be in class. It's a system that is not working. And because also we don't have data of students who are sick, who stay at home and don't go to school because they are sick. And because we don't have that data, we also don't know how much of loss of contact learning they have.
Has it been considered, Mihloti, that you're asking for innovation and out-of-the-box thinking from a department that is, as it is, struggling with, things like sanitation, building the right kind of functional toilets, that, they're still eradicating pit latrines in some schools. So to get to a point where they're rolling out online learning is perhaps maybe asking a bit too much of them at this particular time?
Thank you, Moreno. That's a good question, because that question highlights the social implications that you will have. Now, my research was based on Quintile 1 to Quintile 3 schools. And the reason why I did that is because I come from a poverty-stricken background. But it's also because I understand that the impact on Quintile 1 to 3 schools is not the same as the impact on Quintile 4 and 5 schools. Right? Quintile 4 and 5 schools have the advantage of doing online learning, and which has meant that even if a student is sick and stays at home and is unable to go to school, they are still able to learn. But you don't have that in Quintile 1 to 3 schools, which means that you have disadvantaging poor learners. And you still have those problems that you're talking about, which are of the past, the pit latrine problems, the textbook problems, and classroom problems, and all those other problems like stationery, which means that now you have COVID-19, which is now overburdening the system, which is overburdening the structure that is already shrinking. And we are saying, with a long-term planning, with a structure which will assist students, you will be able to curb the problem for the next 2 or 3 years as COVID-19 subsists, because we cannot predict the virus. To be honest with you, we may sit and speculate all we want, but we cannot predict the virus.
Over 50% of lost, education, essentially that's what it is, whether we want to speak of it as contact learning or non-contact learning, but it's over 50% of lost education for a country that is, as it is, academically, is struggling. You talk about long-term thinking for the basic education department and just government in general. But what becomes the solution right now? You know, because there will be more lost education time in 2021, and we're going to go into 2022. It's just going to be a ripple effect. So what then does the Minister of Basic Education, Mihloti Sherinda, do right now to curb more lost education?
In our third brief, as you would have noted, we come up with the idea of remote learning that which utilizes tools that which are not too costly for the government. For example, the majority of the country has access to radio. The majority of the country has access to television, right? It seems you would argue probably half of the population has access to social media. Now that is very difficult for poor children who live in rural areas. I can understand that. And what you do is that you create a structure where you have teachers who can create a program where they can teach students without them having to do without minimizing the physical contact that which would lead to more problems, right? And that is the solution that we should be getting towards. That is where we should be putting most of our resources into. And that is what we submitted in our brief.
Well, Mihloti, the Helen Suzman Foundation is only but one of a number of organizations that have come through with solutions for government, so we can only but hope that Mihloti Sherinda and her department are listening. But we'll leave it there. Thank you so much for joining us here on Upfront. That is the Helen Suzman Foundation's researcher, Mihloti Sherinda.